Welcome back to Geeks and Grounds, a monthly game club where we play games and brew good conversation. Ow, I hit my nail together. My name is
Off to a
Jenny.
rip-roaring start.
I know, we just are off like a herd of turtles. Again, I'm Jenny Wyndham.
And I'm Joel Thomas. And we're
Ooh.
here to talk games today.
And
What do you got?
I've matched my beverage. I have some Thai iced tea. It is huge. I thought it was going to be a small, and their small is this like the size of my head. So that's all right. I'm going to be all sugared up today. What are you sipping on today?
I recently procured in an indecent way an espresso machine at home. And so I made my own little iced vanilla oat milk
What?
latte. And I'm sipping on that today.
I need to know procure in an indecent way. Does this mean you stole from your workplace?
No.
A coffee
I
shop?
I I think you could say I stole from the man. So it's like the best
Yeah.
possible. Basically, my brother just got married this summer, and he had an espresso machine on his registry, and someone sent him, not someone, the company that sent the espresso machine sent him two. And so we got a little texty text when he got back to North Carolina, and it was
Oh
like,
my goodness.
"We got an extra espresso machine. Would you like it?" And I've just been like, it's not healthy. I'm up to like giant pot of coffee in the morning, latte in the afternoon, shot of espresso. Like it is, I'm wired throughout the day, right?
That sounds amazing. It does sound dangerous. I would never be able to resist the siren call of an espresso machine. We've looked at them, and the only reason we have not bought one is because our kitchen is really tiny and we have no counter space.
Mm-hmm.
If we had counter space, we would be singing a whole different tune, but that sounds awesome.
You know, you don't have to have like a water connection, Jenny. You could probably just put it in your office, just like
I know,
anytime.
just like right here on my desk.
Yeah.
Oh
What's that
no.
sound? I'm just making a
I'm
latte,
just
steaming some milk.
just in my stand up in the mornings, just like, don't mind me. I can't share one with the rest of the class. Sorry. Oh gosh,
That's
the
very good.
dream. You're living the
Yeah.
dream. And for those of you who are new to the podcast, welcome. This is an extension, a conversational extension of the club that we founded called Geeks and Grounds. If you have not signed up for the weekly newsletter, that is the hub of where everything is disseminated. And this is the space where we talk about them together. So do go to geeksandgrounds.com, sign up for the newsletter so you can get all of the information weekly. And if you are new or returning, please do consider going on to your podcast app of choice as you're listening to this, or if you're on YouTube watching this, and either liking, subscribing, rating, reviewing, doing the thing and the
Do that thing.
platforms. Do that thing, because it does really, really help get us in front of more folks. And really, I keep wanting to say spread the good word, but that really has a
Oh
whole different
no.
connotation.
No,
So I won't I
no.
won't say spread the good word. I'll just say get the news out in front of other folks.
Yeah, that's
Bring them
very
into the
good.
cafe.
That's much better. And this is kind of our first step into a new format as a
Yeah.
team here.
Yeah. Did you want to talk a little bit about the new format and kind of like what our hopes were with that?
Well, maybe I'll start big picture and you can go to details. Is that all right?
Yeah, perfect.
So big picture, we Jenny and I started Geeks and Grounds several years ago, and then life happened and we weren't able to like really follow through. So we get to January of 23 and we're like, all right, we're gonna do this thing. We're gonna try to do like a game a month. We have all this a lot of really thoughtful work from Jenny, especially on game selection and the types of themes that we want to explore. And we were like, okay, so let's do like, we'll try and interview a dev for one episode a month, and we'll do a deep dive for one episode a month. And now that we're 9 months into this, we're ready to go to more of a weekly format. So you're getting kind of the first taste of that as we talk about Cosmic Wheel Sisterhood. Do you want to talk a bit about the specifics of the new roundup here?
Yeah, so essentially the content is going to be largely the same, but we're hoping to allow it to become a little bit more palatable because as much as I know I love 3-hour episodes of podcasts, I also know that's not what everyone listens to. And honestly, it's what we found is we're going into so many different topics. We've found that as we have our conversations, we'd love to be able to have more time to let certain ideas breathe. So we'll still do dev interviews. We'll still have deep dives, but our aim in having weeklies is just to spread it out over a little more time, allow things to be a bit more digestible, and to hopefully involve you all in the conversation a little bit more actively. We've been having wonderful conversations in the forums on Discord, and I've been getting lovely notes from folks in the newsletter. But we thought it'd be nice that in gradually, as we learn how to do this weekly format, we can bring in your voices and your thoughts into the podcast itself. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's it for this.
There's such rich conversation happening in the community on a week to week basis, and
Hmm.
uh, there are times where we're like, well, this game's might maybe starting a little slowly, and other people are a little bit further ahead. And so we're kind of hoping too that by talking about the game a bit more consistently throughout the month, maybe you'll be able to understand or see if there are things that are grabbing your attention more progressively, rather than just like a big chunk at the end.
Hmm. And what's kind of I'm live at this moment thinking through. I'm thinking of all the folks who have expressed like, oh, I really want to participate, but I don't have time to play necessarily. What this may offer is an opportunity to listen in throughout the weeks. And even if you're not playing, you get a sense of what's happening in the game. You get a sense of where conversations are going and still hopefully feel encouraged to be involved because, as we've mentioned before, uh, you don't have to play the game to get involved in the conversations. It's just really
Hmm.
the stepping stool and one common point of just discussion that we can have. But as you'll see in our conversation about Cosmic Wheel, the conversations that we have and our topics go far beyond the game itself, which is what makes
Hmm.
it exciting.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's it. That's the thing. That I no more notes. That's right.
So I guess let's segue into our first segment because the podcast now, because we're going weekly, we do have segments that we're going to try to make so that they're consistent. You know what to expect. And the first segment will always be this month's brew. So the game that we are playing together as a community, and that is the Cosmic Wheel Sisterhood.
Cosmic Wheel Sisterhood.
It's very, very good. I have to say, it was really fun to last week while I was at PAX get a text from Joel that was basically like, oh my God, Cosmic Wheel is so good. I can't wait to talk about it. Um, so, for this podcast, because I was at PAX last week and I did just kind of, admittedly, I was just too tired to write the newsletter.
It
Just
happens.
being
It
straight
happens.
honest.
We're real people.
We're real people here. We're human, and I was very tired. So, we are basically going to talk through chapters 1 through 3 for today. So, if you have not played those and you're wanting to reserve that, just know that's what we're doing. You can skip ahead to the pastry case, that's the next section. But chapters 1 through 3, we begin the game. And yes. Uh, and we begin in quite a cozy little location. And I'm curious how you felt, Joel, as you started up Cosmic Wheel.
Well, I will tell you, cozy was not the word that came to mind for me. You
Do
begin
tell.
as this witch in kind of like a two-story cottage in the middle of the void of space, like on a little asteroid. So, like, if by cozy we mean like confined, and yet like somehow you have both like that claustrophobia and agoraphobia at the
Hmm.
same time. Yeah, I guess I could go cozy on that.
I'm so happy you brought it up because here's what really astounded me is you see the screenshots and you're like, this apartment like looks so cute. It's got these little details and all the trappings of what would seem like a cozy cottagecore witchy, you know, environment. But you're right because you're like, wait a second, you're on an asteroid just like in the middle of nowhere. And we learn that this witch Fortuna has been exiled. So this place isn't actually cozy. It's actually a prison, and it's really excruciatingly horrible for her.
Yeah, I guess you could say prison is No, I don't think we can
No.
say prison is cozy. You can say it's tight, like it's small.
Yeah,
Uh,
confined.
yeah, the thing that struck me first, and when I play any sort of like game that has role playing elements, I kind of decide at the very beginning, like, how am I going to play this? Am I going to play this as
Mhm.
like, how would Joel react in these situations? Am I going to play this like, okay, this character has a backstory and I want to play true to that character's backstory, or some other, like, I'm going to be the villain in this run, or whatever. And the start of this game, when you realize that you are playing this witch who has been kind of exiled and is living in this isolation, I was like, I'm going to play this whole game like a person that is furious that she has been exiled
Mm.
for hundreds of years. And
Mhm.
like that, I really tried to adopt that with my character choices and my dialogue choices throughout the whole game. So how did you feel as you were kind of getting into it?
Oh my goodness. I love because you played it the exact opposite that I did. So I think we're going to have some real good conversations. I'm very interested to hear how your playthrough went. Um, I went through it. It was weird because I had this like weird dissonance where sometimes I was playing as Fortuna and sometimes I was
Mm-hmm.
playing as myself, which
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to identify what is it that made me choose between the two. And I think because I actually am not entirely sure. I think strangely enough, whenever Fortuna was asked a question about herself, like some of the more reflection based questions, I tended to answer as myself. But then, whenever in a character interaction, when I'm talking with someone else, I started to try to role play more as Fortuna, which
Mm.
maybe messed up my whole character arc and story, anyways. But generally, I was very much of the mind of like, I want to move forward. As we'll talk about, like with the framework of having mercy, having forgiveness top of mind
Mm.
against anyone who may have done me wrong, specifically Adana, the coven leader, where I was like,
Wow.
I will give her the benefit of the doubt that she was doing what she thought was best for the coven, even though it meant I was trapped here. Um, yeah. So I take it you didn't do the same.
No, like wow, yeah, we really did play, and I think you've played maybe more than one time through
I'm
this,
in
or
my
you're
second playthrough
okay.
and I've already messed it up and I'm thinking I'm gonna have to restart because I was gonna play Vengeful and I accidentally slipped into my old ways. So I think I actually have to restart because I really want to play like ready for vengeance, you know?
Yeah, and I think we won't talk about it this week, but there was one major
Mhm.
decision point that I felt really shoehorned into that I did not
Mhm.
think Vengeful Fortuna would have made, but there were no the dialogue just didn't really give me the choice to change it. But since we're in
Interesting.
acts 1 through 3, let's start with like some of the baseline. Like, how does this
Yeah.
game look, feel, function?
Mhm.
First of all, God, the artwork in this game, like the animation, is gorgeous. Like,
Yeah.
and they know it. They know it. The makers of this game, like you kind of have this pixel art looking cottage that you're in, and kind of like a lo-fi witch that you're walking around as. And then a central mechanic of the game is that you're kind of manipulating art to build what is essentially like a tarot deck, or something that would be akin to a tarot deck. So like
Mhm.
the art style is very important. A lot gets communicated through the art style of like the different character designs and colors and themes. So that's like look and feel, some of the things that stood out to me. And then baseline mechanics are very like dialogue driven. Like, you're in the situation, you're asked a question, you get a few options for how you might respond. Sometimes, depending on the cards that you draw, those dialogue options change, and then you're left
Mhm.
with dealing with the repercussions of your choices.
Ooh, yeah. Oh my goodness. I'm really curious. How did you feel? Because the cards that you use in the game are created by you, the player.
Mm.
As we go through, and we'll talk about sort of where we get these cards and where we get the assets for the cards. But just in terms of mechanics, did you have you so far liked the building of the cards, or has that been kind of like a I'm going to do it just to kind of move on with the story?
I had a mixed experience with it. I am to be clear for everyone on the line here, listening here. I am certainly not a visual artist, but I appreciate and do enough visual art that it's like I like to do it. You know what I mean? Like I'm not good
Mhm.
at it, but I like to do it. And so it
Mhm.
was like where I hit a roadblock mechanically is like I loved the idea of building cards, and I even think most of the mechanics of like manipulating the artwork to build your own card I really liked.
Mhm.
It was like there was a degree of freedom that I wanted for card design that wasn't there, that
Mhm.
made me like with probably 90% of the cards that I made, I was like, it's good enough. Like the thing that I really envisioned when I first started like
Right.
building out this card, I can't quite do. So I
Yeah,
don't know.
yeah.
What were your experiences with that?
I feel pretty similarly. I think I really loved it, and I definitely spent a lot of time in it. Um,
Yeah.
like, just kind of an absurd time when I'm the first playthrough I recorded it, and looking at some of the playthroughs, it would be like for one chapter, for example, the chapter itself maybe actually only took about 2 hours, but my playthrough was like 3.5 because I was sitting there just finagling with the cards for so long. They were so much fun. I did feel like, especially once I got the hang of it, I felt like I wanted a little bit more,
Mhm.
understanding they're not recreating, like, they're not designing Photoshop in a game, but I really wished we had the ability to. There are backgrounds that you can use. I would have loved to just been able to zoom out and like finagle with that background just a
This
little
was
bit.
100%, and this is probably one I have very few complaints about this game. I love this
Same.
game. This was one of the very few. Is like
Hmm.
when you are one of the first things you do is select the background for the card that you're going to be
Right. Yeah.
building, but you see that in like a landscape layout, like it's a large image, and essentially what you do is you take like imagine like taking a little cursor that's like a smaller rectangle and moving that rectangle around that large landscape placemat image to
Hmm.
find like your viewfinder showing your actual card background. And I was like, these backgrounds are so cool. It feels like I'm being robbed that I only get to choose a tiny little portion of them.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I 100% agree. I'm so glad you felt the same way because I felt a little like, am I just being whiny? But okay.
No, no, I don't think so. And I do remember, and I didn't ask ahead of time, so I won't say specifically who, but I know someone else in the Discord did mention that. So shout
Mm,
out to that person. You know who you are. Um, but yeah, someone else in the Discord mentioned it too. So I was just like, yes, I totally agree. But other than that, and the other small detail is I would have loved to be able to expand the sizes of some of the assets a little bit more. There's a cap to how
mhm,
big you can make it. And there was a
mhm.
couple of things that I wanted to like really stretch out to take up like a good chunk of the card. And that was not possible. But again, minor mechanical sort of details.
Mhm.
In the large scope of things, I had a blast with the card creation. It definitely did make everything feel much more personal, and I felt way more invested as I was reading them and telling
Mm.
the future, because I remembered making those cards, and it just felt way more personal.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Honestly, like now that I've run through the game, I would like I don't know if maybe this exists and you already know that it exists. I don't know if this exists, but like it would be so cool if you could somehow print off the cards that you made and like in sticker format or something that you could like order them. That would be such a cool way to expand on the card creation. And then I would literally like just go back and make more and more cards. Like I
Mhm.
would I really enjoyed that experience. So yeah,
Yeah. Someone, I don't know if this is through the game itself or through the dev team, but someone did print out the cards. And I will make a note and I'm going to include that in the pour over materials this week. So as people are listening, you can go to the newsletter and see. I'm trying to do better about taking notes. So I remember. But yeah, someone did do that and they looked amazing. So whoever that is, I would love to know how they did it.
Yeah, yeah. This is like a since we're still not really getting into the storyline yet, another kind of mechanical thing that like
Hmm.
this is very much just the way the dice rolls or the way the cards play or whatever. I kept drawing like the same card over and over again. And it was like, I've made all these beautiful cards and I keep getting this one and it keeps making me respond in these ways.
That's fate.
It's
That's fate
just
for you.
fate. It's
Yep.
just fate. I know.
But I guess anything else like mechanically that you wanted to talk about
Mm.
before we hop into the story?
Maybe just like a lot of this game is about, I'll use the word managing, but considering
Mm.
your relationships with other characters. So I don't know that we
Mhm.
really talked about that explicitly, but like there's a cast of other witches and characters that you're going to be meeting throughout this
Right.
game, and a big component of it is, for me at least, is trying to guess in dialogue how my choices might impact these relationships, because there were some that I just wanted to
Mhm.
light on fire almost immediately, and others that I was like, I want to cultivate this and make it the best relationship.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a really good segue into maybe actually state sort of one of the core questions that we're going to be talking about, as well as jumping into the story itself. The question that we posed in the newsletter that we're going to be revisiting throughout this entire month is this relationship between fault and responsibility. And I think, especially when you're reading the fortunes of characters, of other people, um, as you said, when you're in conversation, what is your relationship with these characters? What responsibilities do you have to them? What have you done in the past that maybe you have conflicts, that you're trying to address or not address? And sort of
Mm.
where do those lines lie? And I think fault and responsibility are two words that very much come back again and again as we talk about these relationships between characters. And the first relationship we have is with not a witch, but a behemoth, a demon behemoth from the void named Abramar. Um, what did you think of Abramar?
uh I'm gonna say that I played this like vengeful angry witch that's been by herself for 200 years.
Mm-hmm.
Abramar was the joy of my life throughout this game. It was like, I
Yes.
loved the jokes. I leaned into some like flirtation.
Mm-hmm.
Abramar looks like almost like a giant snake body with like a man's torso and head with like a giant snake's body and maybe like lobster tail on the end. I can't quite remember what the end of his tail looked like,
There
but
is a joke later on about shrimp or lobster being used to refer to
oh,
Abramar. I
that
don't
you're
know if you got
right.
that joke, but yeah.
Oh, I didn't even think about that. Okay, so it's like a shrimpy body and then kind of
Yeah.
like a man's like torso and head on top with like six eyes.
Mhm.
I loved him. I thought he was such a
Yeah.
cool character. His motivations were fun. And the opening of the game is essentially like him offering you the choice of like,
Right.
You have the ability to let me help you out of the situation, but it's going to be very costly. Um,
Right.
and I took it as like, you know what? I'm ready to like burn this world to the ground. I've been locked away for 200 years. So,
Yeah, it was really interesting because when the whole first chapter is just a series of lessons, and you basically, as you're learning getting the tutorial, how to make the cards, how to do readings, and you're also learning about these elements that you're going to be able to balance and collect and use to create the cards, but you're also basically shoring up the price of what you're going to pay for this power for this deck, which I by the end of the first chapter I was like, "Oh, wait a second. I totally forgot I'm supposed to be figuring out like the price I'm going to pay," because I was so excited about the tarot cards. What
oh
about
no.
you? Yeah.
This explains a lot. Oh no. I didn't even think about it. I again like every character choice I made was, I've been locked away. I want to burn everything down. Like, this is
Yeah.
awful. Everything is unjust. And so the opening kind of choice trade-off that you make for engaging, for me, I was like, yeah, you help me out of this, I will give you the coven. Like, that was kind of the starting point for
Wow.
everything for
That's
me.
amazing.
And I did not realize until this very moment until like how much that impacted my later games. So what did it look like for you as you were going through that? Because it must have been different.
Yeah, I think oh man, I wish I need to go back and like actually look at the final because there's that final question where he's like, "What are you willing to give up?" And I think I actually was like, "I'm willing to just sacrifice myself at the end of it." Because at the end of it for me, I was like, if I can't get out of here, what's even the point? So like I'm willing to just give everything up of myself to get out. So that
Wow.
was the tack that I took as I was playing, is that if I was caught and left in isolation, I'm as good as like dead or worse than dead anyways.
Mm.
So might as well give everything up for that. And I did not go with like the coven being this like trade-off for me.
Wow, I cannot wait until our next recording when we get into the end
Yeah.
game and like all of how all this plays out
Oh, it's
because
gonna be so good.
there's some moments where the last like 25% of this game, like the train is just moving so fast and it's like there's no
Mm-hmm.
you can't slow it down. It's going towards a destination. Just hang on tight.
Yep.
And I cannot wait to hear about how different your experience must have been than mine.
Oh
I
my goodness.
wow.
Yeah. Oh my
Uh,
gosh.
I think one other thing to call out because you mentioned this a second ago is uh, you have just finished 200 years of 1,000 year long sentence.
Mhm.
So you're like coming unchained and like as I played it, like furious after just 200 years. So the idea is like to continue out this sentence is unbearable and you have to get out
Right.
of this.
Right. Yeah, I which what an interesting, especially as we'll talk about chapter 3 because that's where things I think really start to like show
Hmm.
because chapter 1 is the tutorial you go through. Chapter 2 is kind of the same too where it's like you start meeting I think there's this arbiter named Thea who comes through
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
basically is just the like, oh, hey, we're going to start lightening up your sentence. People can come visit you. And that's really the first 2 chapters is setting the stage. But it is very much about solitude and how much you have been sort of simmering away, depending on your player personality, on what you're going to do when you can finally communicate. Chapter 3 is fascinating because it starts to open up the world. You finally get to see the rest of your sisters from the coven. Um, Now, I'm really curious now because I know that you have played this with a much more vengeful take than I have. When people from the coven started showing up, what was your feeling towards them? Because you had predominantly, I think it was your two best friends, and two of the really major characters in this game, Dahlia and oh, what was it, Jasmine?
Jasmine. Yeah.
They show up. How did you feel about them?
I took the approach of first of all, like these are my friends. I'm starving for,
Right.
relationship. But what I was sniffing out in these conversations was, are you going to uphold the status quo or are you looking to break this very broken system? And
Yes.
so for me, I I don't think this will be a surprising statement, but like it becomes almost immediately clear that Dahlia is not
Mhm.
happy with the current leadership, not happy with the way this coven is working, not happy with your sentence. And Jasmine is very much like, oh, but I'm sure everybody has the best of intentions. And
Mhm.
apparently she was British, you find out at some point in the game. So
Yeah.
imagine I'm like speaking with a little British accent. But yeah, I like once I kind of sussed that out, I let all of my character decisions, like I think it was in chapter 3. You have kind of the opportunity to test Jasmine
Yes.
and offer her some information and see how she uses it. And
Mhm.
she, for me, in my run through, failed that test. And so from that point forward, I was like, "Fuck Jasmine, I am."
Ooh. Wow. Wow, so strong. It's funny because I, like you, very much and very quickly align myself with Dahlia. I think Dahlia as a character is someone I just personally resonated with more.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, she just wanted she unlike Jasmine, like you said, wants to just change the system and doesn't want to see gradual progress. She wants to just make things happen because she understands from her perspective, like gradual progress means no progress, essentially. You will never be alive to see the change you want to see.
Hmm.
Jasmine, which is quite interesting, is sort of this like sort of business owner. She's very much benefiting from like the people who are coming to purchase her potions, who all happen, I think, to be more of the elder and more powerful witches. And so she's very much like, I have this business, I have these things that are going well. Like everyone wants to have good like stuff happen with the coven. We just want it different ways. So let's like just make sure we all kind of get along as we figure out what's going on. What I
Yeah.
appreciate oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just
No,
agreeing.
you're just agreeing. What I appreciated was, and as we continue in this, this will become more and more relevant. But from the jump, even though I felt very much like I really like and align with Dahlia, I personally, I know you're like fuck Jasmine, but I didn't feel like Jasmine was a villain in any sort of way. I just felt like man, I think we've maybe grown out of this friendship kind of way. Like it was really weird because we know that all three of them were best friends. And it was funny where it's like, I don't know, have you've been in friendships before where maybe after a certain point of time you're like, I think we just maybe have grown into
Hmm.
different like ways of looking at the world and you're not a bad
Yeah.
person necessarily. Um, but we just see it very differently and it's now become very clear to me.
Yeah, I think if this were a real world scenario, I would probably have played it very much like you just described it. But
Mhm.
because I was playing it as this
Because you were
very
vengeful.
rageful person who's been locked away for 200 years, I was like, no, fuck this. Like, you are living in this society. You're not challenging the status quo. Like,
Yeah.
another element to this is the portrayal of these two women. I gotta imagine it was intentional. Is like Dahlia is what it looks to be like a black woman, like dark skinned woman, and
Mhm.
Jasmine is a white woman, like blonde, curly hair kind of thing. And so the fact that Dahlia is the one
Mhm.
that's seeking to change that system and Jasmine is more comfortable with it just felt like it kind of embodied a lot of our like real life cultural issues where it's like the
Yeah.
people of these typically marginalized minoritized groups are the ones that are actively pushing for change and the betterment of our society, and the people that are satisfied with the status quo don't make the effort that could be made. And I
Mhm.
was like, I'm putting all of my real life frustrations into exactly these two relationships with that in mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really valid and fair thing to do and also a really, really good point. I also was when I was playing, I was like, this especially as the game progresses, and you see some of the later mechanics come up because we start with the card mechanics, but there are some other systems that come into play around chapter 4. Um, as soon as those systems came in play, I was like, this can't be coincidence. This
Hmm.
I would be very sad if this was a coincidence, but
Yeah.
it can't be coincidence that they are characterized in the ways they're characterized, especially in this year 2023.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
uh, and I think they make reference. It might not be until later chapters that Fortuna has maybe like a Mexican background. Does that sound right?
Yes, I believe so. And I think we find out a little bit more because we also find, well, this is maybe light spoilers, but we find through some of her like familial connections, and that's kind of how we
Yeah,
make those
that's
connections.
right.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
and I think that's also a point that we haven't talked about, which is I think it's in chapter 2 you get the flashback for
Hmm.
Fortuna,
Yes, you're
um,
right.
that all witches were essentially once mortals. And so
Hmm.
Fortuna is driving around in like a pizza truck in ostensibly like the 1960s US.
Yep.
And you get to make a pizza as her and like arrange your toppings. I did kind of fast forward through that part because I was like,
Yeah.
I want to make cards, not pizza. Um, and then she what I think the words they use are they ascend. She becomes a witch.
Hmm.
And so I think it's an important like element of this story that like doesn't really come into play until later chapters and relationships. But the
Right.
idea that like all of these witches were at one point mortal beings, like normal everyday people that at some point in
Mhm.
their lives ascended.
Yep. Well, and we do get a little hint of that as well with Dahlia, because I don't know if this comes out. Maybe it depends on some of the conversation points to
Mm.
what degree this comes out. But Dahlia was a mother. They allude to the fact. Wait, yeah, you learn
What?
in some of these conversation points that Dahlia was a mother. Um, but her children, I think, were mortal or they never ascended to become witches because I think that she talked about a grandson or a son who died like as a human in this one battle. There's that there are grandkids that she won't really take on unless they ascend and become witches, and then maybe she'll tutor them. But they do talk about the fact that there are dalliances between witches and humans, and it results in
Mm-hmm.
witches having families down on Earth or in other planets, that have mortal lives.
It's very possible because I played the first two chapters as the demo, so that was like a
Hmm.
month before I played like the full game. So it is possible that I encountered some of that and just have forgotten. But like this doesn't
Mm-hmm.
sound familiar to me at all.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
the ability to like form relationships with it. There's a different witch that you meet at some point that like is interested in forming a relationship with a person on Earth, and so like
Right.
I definitely did know about that, but I did not know about Dahlia's history, and I'm wondering because I channeled so much into how are these two witches related to the status quo. I wonder if I
Mm.
missed some of the like interpersonal conversations because of that.
Yeah. Well, because it is because I understood why, but I also got very sad because in many of the conversations, you pick one option, you can't go back to pick the others. And so you have to
Oh,
really commit to like saying, all right, this is a playthrough I want to know about. Yeah, like love life. I asked a lot about love life, which is why I think
oh,
I
I did
got
not. Okay,
see, yeah. I asked about the juicy gossip, the hot goss around the coven.
I did do that.
So
Yes.
yeah, that was really my focus for the first chunk of the game. I was very much not focused on like I knew that we were setting up sort of stones to walk a path of changing what's going on with the coven, but in my immediate like respite from solitude or respite from solitude, I was just like I just want to talk to friends. I don't care.
Oh, that's
I
so
don't care about
sweet.
what's going on. I just want to see my friends. Yeah, super fascinating. You're already like starting a revolution and I'm just like let's just toast marshmallows for a second, please.
I did you so I think I asked this without any spoilers. Did you meet all the witches? Did you get the
Yes.
award for that? Okay.
Yep.
So I was wondering if some of my choices were forcing me to meet some of these wishes a lot sooner, and or
Mm-hmm.
if that's just when you're supposed to meet them. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but there were definitely things where I felt like I was kind of shoehorning in things in conversation with Dahlia and Jasmine to that essentially let me meet these other witches like almost immediately, which gave me
Oh.
another way to kind of quickly assess like what's the
Mhm.
landscape of the coven right now.
Mhm.
Um, yeah. So we get through chapter 2. We have our flashbacks. Chapter 2 is also when we meet Thea. Is that right? The
Yes.
arbiter.
Yeah. I don't know if it's Thea or Thea.
Oh, okay.
I'm
I don't know
not
either.
entirely sure. So sorry if I say it differently. But yeah, Thea.
Yeah. I have no idea.
Yeah.
I don't. It's just text, so
Yeah.
it could be Thea. I have no idea. Um, what was kind of like the hallmark of the third chapter as you start kind of expanding out and meeting new witches? What was that like for you?
I mean, I think just finally moving from solitude to meeting your two best friends, that's like the biggest thing. As I talked about when we were introducing the game, I think the title does something really interesting in terms of bringing you from this really individual point of view, like really introspective solo view, to your small intimate group of friends, to coven, to society. Like it
Oh
gradually increases the
yeah.
scope of how you think about the world around you. in some ways I felt very much of like, oh, this is kind of how we develop as humans. Like we move from thinking only about yourself to finally
Mm.
trying to care about those around you and society as a whole. So I think the fact that this is the first step into just not thinking about you and your punishment and your escape, but more of like what is happening around you is really fascinating. And I think that's my favorite part of chapter 3.
That is really interesting. What was my favorite part of chapter 3? I think I was just so into Dahlia, not only as like a friend, but I was like, yeah, damn, like she is fine. Like I want to romance her. I was like,
Yeah.
let's do this. And I like Abramar in my conversation even like asked me about that with Dahlia. So I was like,
Mhm.
all right, let's get after it. Um, so I think that was kind of the only other kind of like thing that I was looking at besides kind of just like connecting with these two and sussing out like, are you going to be an
Mhm.
ally with me as I go to break this shit or not?
Yeah. Ooh, I'm very excited to talk through chapter 4 with you next week because yeah, there are some things that I think we're going to diverge on quite a bit as we go into the next section of the game. Um
For sure.
Really quick, before we head over to the pastry case, I wanted to highlight some of those pour over materials, those supplementary materials that we included in the newsletter. The most notable one is the John Oliver video on impact of solitary confinement. I feel like we've already talked a little bit about it in terms of like how it looked in the game. Um, I just encourage everyone to watch that video because it's something that I didn't even really know was a practice that was still continuing at this point.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I knew in some in my at least in my idea of it, I thought it was in rare cases. It is quite frequently used still in the US. So I think if you're not familiar, especially with the US sort of prison system, incarceration system, definitely take a look at it. It was really eye opening for me. And yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Joel.
I remember watching that when it first came out, and I was kind of going back through it again. I have kind of like a personal experience with it. It's not like for me personally, but
Hmm.
one of my best friends growing up, he was in a band with me, and ended up dropping out of. We went to the same university after we graduated high school, and after freshman year, he dropped out, and I didn't really like. I kind of lost touch with him, and reconnected a couple of years after graduation, and he had developed, or maybe always had, I don't really know enough about this, but he had developed somewhat severe schizophrenia, and ended up getting arrested, getting in trouble with law. And I later learned, either by his choice or because he was forced to, being in solitary almost the entire time that he was in prison. And if you have not watched the video on John Oliver's kind of description and helping you understand the impacts of that on people and the effectiveness of it as a form of like incarceral experience, like you really should. It is quite eye opening. And it wasn't until I watched the John Oliver piece that I was really able to understand just how damaging this must have been for my friend. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's bad. It's real bad,
Yeah.
y'all.
Yeah. Well, and I think, I mean, what's as folks play through the game, especially, because one thing that I wasn't surprised by, like narratively, but I was surprised in that it kept coming up is Fortuna constantly referencing this idea of like I was alone for so long and it really harmed me. It comes up in different readings when
Hmm.
Fortuna's talking to other people. It comes up in conversations with Abramar, in self-reflective moments. You're constantly reminded of that 200-year solitude that Fortuna had and how it just like absolutely just wrecked her in a lot of ways. And I think thank you to everyone in Discord who also like put that content up and said like, hey, if anyone is really impacted by this kind of like negative,
Hmm.
there's a lot of negative self-talk that happens as a result. And so like thank you to everyone
Yeah.
who like warned one another about that. But I think I was just amazed that the developers didn't just sort of once Fortuna can see people, everything's okay again because you can just talk to people. It's like this
Hmm.
stuff sticks with you for a long, long time. And
Yeah.
I thought that that was at least well done in the sense that it reminded me that, like, hey, this isn't something that just goes away after you're like back in society.
Okay, so here's something interesting that happened in my playthrough, and I don't remember what chapter it happened in. I don't think it really
Hmm.
matters for the sake of this point, but um, there was a part where Fortuna takes a reading of herself, and or there it happens more than once, but there's this
Hmm.
one particular moment, and the dialogue option that I chose, uh, she did not say. She like I chose a dialogue option, but then what she
Hmm.
said was like a glib cover of that so that she wasn't saying what actually happened. Did you get
I think
that?
that, yes, I think that was in chapter 3. I can't remember. I think it's when you may be doing a reading. It was I think Dahlia, and Dahlia's like, "Hey, but you do a reading since I know witches always lie to themselves," and
That's right. Yeah.
that you did lie to yourself.
Yeah. I thought that
Yeah.
was one of the really powerful moments because, and this goes beyond like the topic of solitary confinement, but
Mhm.
this idea of when we have experienced such severe trauma, our ability to like grapple with it and face it directly, like that is a long process before you're even able to like truly acknowledge it.
Mhm.
So I thought that it was a moment where it was like such a subtle thing that I thought really communicated the realities of these
Yeah.
experiences well.
Oh, I'm so glad that you brought that up. I totally forgot about that moment, but I remember playing it in the game, and I actually did one of those lean backs, in the chair, like, "Ooh,
Ooh.
okay, this is where we're going," and this is like still the first section of the game.
Mhm, mhm.
I did want to highlight because I did ask one person if I could read a portion of their newsletter response, just because it does go back to the overall concept of fault and responsibility, and I thought it was a really, really great connection as we continue to think about it throughout the game. This is from Hinton, Anne Hinton in the Discord. And yeah, I appreciated the way that real world stuff was brought into this part of the conversation. So I'll just read it aloud. Um, for some reason, the concepts of fault and responsibility make me think about Pakeha, or white settler, people's relationship to historical wrongdoing in Aotearoa, sorry if I'm mispronouncing it, Aotearoa, New Zealand. The English Crown and New Zealand government were responsible for a lot of wrong towards the Maori of Aotearoa over many years, and of course, many private European settlers and their descendants were responsible too. Many contemporary Pakeha feel that they're being blamed for the continued disadvantages faced by Maori. Quote, I wasn't even born when that stuff happened, so why are you blaming me? I studied some of these attitudes in my training to be a teacher, and as a Pakeha, I have also gone through my own journey regarding these ideas. Where I think I've landed is that it's not the fault of Pakeha descendants that, in general, Maori have worse health outcomes, lower life expectancy, and so on. However, it is the responsibility of Pakeha as the largest and most broadly advantaged group to address these disparities and contribute towards improving things. This evokes for me the memory of uncomfortable conversations with stubborn and often racist Pakeha who have probably spent a lifetime refusing to engage with the possibility that they might be wrong about the world.
Wow.
So, I really thank you so much, Hinton, for submitting that. I really appreciated reading it because um, a I think it's really important to also see. We talk a lot about the U.S. perspective because we're
Mhm.
both based in the U.S. And oftentimes we talk about like marginalized people in the U.S. This was a really great perspective because I hadn't personally considered folks outside of the US, like in New Zealand, the Maori Pakeha relationship and dynamics. And so I thought that was really cool you brought that up. But also this idea that we are continuously addressing even today that, like, if you have not done something wrong, doesn't mean you have no responsibility to address it. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And yeah, double thanks for sending that in.
Hmm.
Um I definitely was reminded of this very similar conversations in the States that we have around slavery or treatment of indigenous and native peoples. Um and coming to very similar conclusions that it is like my responsibility as a white person to like dismantle the systems that are still in place, or
Right.
even that just kind of begins with acknowledging that they even exist. And that seems like just acknowledging that these systems exist feels so threatening to a lot of the like other white people in the States, that it's like, why? Well, can we not just like acknowledge that this is happening so that we can start doing something about it? We're not saying it's your fault that like redlining happened throughout like,
Hmm.
1920s all the way up until like the 1990s. We are saying that since you know that it happened, we need to be making adjustments to bank reform and making sure that people are not getting, put into slums based on their skin color. Like,
Hmm.
it's not your fault that that happened, but if you don't start adjusting the systems that are still in place or advocating for those systems to change, then that is your fault. Like, I have a really hard time being patient with people that are unable to or unwilling to see that.
Hmm.
But it's like it's the literal least you can do as a person that has benefited from those historical injustices.
Hmm. Yep. I can see again, we can see the tie-in with Dahlia here
Hmm.
and why
Hmm.
perhaps some of Dahlia's ideas and ways of moving about the, I guess, cosmos, not just the world, really resonate. And I think that's something as you move into this next section of the game, I think chapters 4 and 5
Hmm.
really pay attention to systems as people are moving through this as you're moving through this game. Pay attention to how each witch believes these systems should stay, go, or be changed, and maybe start thinking about how you feel about that, both within the game, but also maybe how some of these systems mirror what we are seeing in the real world. I think
Yeah.
that's what I definitely would love to encourage you all to consider.
I think I'd also ask, like, if you are playing your runs with like a specific mindset, I'd love to know what those mindsets are. We've kind of shared a bit about
Hmm.
ours as we've been playing, but like if you have a specific goal as you're playing through it or a way that you're trying to act,
Hmm.
I'd love to hear like what the range of experiences are, because I think especially as we get to the end game and our
Hmm.
monthly hangout that we have for those that are in the Discord, it's going to lead to some really interesting outcomes to learn about all the different end game experiences that people have.
Hmm. For sure. Yeah, I cannot wait. I think it's going to be real good. Um I think if that's good, let's move on over to the pastry case.
Eating my pastry. Mm.
Oh no.
So good.
Oh my gosh, so good. It's the pastry case. The pastry case is our grab bag of topics. Basically, anything that does not have to do with this month's brew. We just want to connect with you on other things that we are consuming,
Mhm.
not just food, the media. So, books, events, movie. I don't even know what other media is there. Games, shows, stuff.
Campfire stories. Yeah.
Exactly. So, Joel, what have you been up to the last couple weeks? Because we skipped a week
Yeah.
because I was out of town.
Yeah, you were doing all kinds of fun adventurous stuff, and I was at home painting my house. It was funny. We had our end of month hang the day that I painted the exterior of my house. I've
Yeah.
never done this before. Rented a paint sprayer, and what I will say is, um, I've done a lot of home remodeling projects. This is one I would absolutely do again. Like, the paint sprayer thing was like super fun. Like, there were some dangerous moments on a rooftop that led to some dangerous moments below the roof, but
Oh
um
no.
otherwise, yeah, it was like a really fun experience. And like, I don't know, would I just may like sound like Tom Sawyer or Huck Finn or whoever, like encouraging someone to paint their fence, but like I thought it was a lot of fun doing this. So yeah, good times, good times.
Oh, I wish I could honestly painting just especially a place as big as a house where you're like you just get the rolly wheel, you just get the spray, you can just go to town for most of it. It sounds
Hmm.
really fun, like reverse power wash simulator basically.
That's exactly what I actually did rent a power washer at one point to
Oh,
prep the
that's so
house for
cool.
it. The paint sprayer was more fun than the power washer because I was a lot less wet after. I was very wet after using the power washer. Oh man! Speaking of wet, we went to the coast and went camping this weekend. It was like an annual thing that we do with some friends, and great time. One of my favorite experiences of the year. Until Monday morning, Monday is a holiday here in the States, and I woke up in my tent in a literal pool of water. Like the
No.
base of my tent, the waterproofing failed, and even though it was like on a tarp and seemed like a dry ground, I woke up and it was like my sleeve was soaking wet. I like you could hear like the squishy sounds of like the sleeping bag and sleeping mat on water.
Oh
It
my
was
god,
so
no.
bad.
Oh, that's the most miserable like, waking up wet is probably one of the worst feelings in the world. Like,
Yeah.
in terms of, like, things that you just really are just kinda send heebie-jeebies up your spine, like, that for me, mm-mm.
Yeah, it was not great. But yeah, we did some surf or I did some surfing this weekend. It was my first time surfing on the Oregon coast.
Oh,
I've done like
cool.
Cali and Hawaii and Florida, but first time in Oregon and it was awesome. Like did the
Yeah?
wetsuit and the hood and the booties and the whole thing and it was great. Like I'm probably going to make this a more regular part of my life now because it was just like such a good time doing it.
Nice. Was it I mean, you have the wetsuit on, so I presume you're not that cold, but is it, like, still very cold?
Wetsuits are just goddamn magic. Like, so get in the comments and explain why wetsuits work because I don't understand. But like, no, I did not. Like, my hands were cold because that was the one part of my body that was exposed,
Mhm.
and every other part of my body was like, no, I feel no temperature
I feel
change at all.
nothing.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
amazing.
It's incredible because the water was icy. Like it's cold water in the Oregon coast. So yeah, I don't know how it works. It's magic. Someone needs to explain it to me.
Mhm.
But yeah, what do you, so tell, you were traveling though. Like you did real travel the last couple weeks. Tell us what's been going
Yes.
on.
So I was at PAX West last week, which was in Seattle. Super fun. What PAX West is for folks who aren't familiar, it's a like what 4-day 5-day convention that takes place in Seattle that has to do with video games predominantly, and so people will come, they get to play game demos, there's some light cosplaying, there's panels, fan meetups, just it's a good time, it's a fan event essentially. And not only was I showing off a game there, Spirit Swap, Lo-Fi Beats to Match 3-2 had a booth, which was super well done. A huge shout out to the team because I was running around taking meetings for my day job, basically, and I wasn't
Mhm.
able to stay at the booth. They all knocked it out of the park. I kept hearing about everyone, even not knowing I was part of that team, they would be like, "Oh, have you played Spirit Swap?" I was like, "Tell me more.
Oh,
What do you think about
cool.
Spirit Swap?" Yeah.
That's the market
So
intel we
that
want.
was exactly that was awesome. I also was there. My day job, we had a title there that I'm doing influencer outreach for called Pacific Drive. So that was super fun. Just getting to meet the team in person, just like observing people play. And I did a bunch of panels. So it was all in all a good time. The panels were really fun. One was about cozy games, just recommending titles. One was about grief and how video games
Oh,
provide space to talk about grief, which was like, honestly, I'm so sad it wasn't recorded. We kept it, opted it to not be streamed because we were like,
mm.
this is a really heavy topic. We want people to be able to feel safe if they come up with, stories or questions or things. But oh my God, I think it was one of my favorite talks I think I've ever done. It was really good.
Wow.
And then I also was a part of a Game Boy Advance panel where we, like, with the audience, created a list of the top 15 games of Game Boy Advance. Um, Everyone there was so much like, I think I am so much not an aggressive speaker in situations, and so it made me just like, "Oh my god, I need to, like, get aggressive in these situations." I was very sad because my pick, Harvest Moon: Friends of Middletown, got bumped out in the last 30 seconds of the panel, the last 30 seconds for a Kirby game, which I'm not too upset about, but I'm still a little upset.
It didn't
So,
even make top 15.
no.
Brutal.
Absolute robbery. Honestly, we didn't even have Pokemon Emerald up there either. So I feel like I
Oh.
feel like our list could definitely use some editing.
So
But
to everybody who was in the panel that's listening to this podcast now, just know Jenny's salty about the list that you made, and it's your fault.
yes, absolutely. Word on the street, I was walking around. I had a couple people stop me and say similarly. So, no, it was good. It's a panel by vote. So the
Uh,
democratic process really served us well.
Force rank. I don't know.
Exactly.
The Grief panel that you were on, did anybody talk
Hmm.
about Greece? For those of you who don't know, Greece is
Oh,
one of my all-time favorite
absolutely.
games.
I brought it
My
up.
whole
Of
tattoo sleeve is
course.
about Greece. Yeah, tell me about what was the general. Could you, if you wouldn't mind sharing about it?
Yeah. Gosh, the panel honestly ranged quite a broad spectrum of like just personal stories around grief, how games approach it, how we hope that they do so in the future. It was quite a broad panel, but with Greece, what I brought up is I appreciated that there wasn't an attempt to put words to grief in the game itself. That uh, because at least the way I've experienced grief before, it's been such you hear people talking about grief in like stages, right? You go through these
Mm,
stages, it's a linear process, you kind of check off the boxes and you're done. And it really isn't that. And grief also is really complicated in that for me, it hasn't just been sadness. It's been like a lot of anger and guilt and
mhm,
resentment at the same time that I'm sad. And it's like this very hard to describe feeling. Uh, Greece was so beautiful in that it allowed space for that and it didn't try to force a specific verbiage around grief. It allowed me to interpret and feel what I needed to feel in that moment.
mm.
So yeah, we talked a lot about that game. There was some really, really good discussion. Oh, yeah, we'll have to like relive that panel or do it again at
Yeah.
some point.
Oh, that sounds so cool. It's just
Hmm.
for those of you who haven't played this game, add it to your list. It's a relatively short one. It's this beautiful watercolor and kind of stencil style art experience. The soundtrack
Hmm.
and score is beautiful, and you're essentially like working through you work through the quote 5 stages of grief, but you only even know that if you find like some specific elements in the game. But to your point,
Exactly.
it's very like it's the vibes. Like felt I felt how I feel when I grieve as I was playing
Hmm.
through it, rather than like cheesy dialogue options. There's like I reject the thing that you're talking about. I deny the thing that you are saying. It's like I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it's really funny because I was like, we have these like two extremes where, like, in the worst case, sort of extreme, mechanically, you have like the Call of Duty press F to pay respects, right? It's like you are going through the physical motion of grieving, but it is mechanized so much that it has is devoid of all meaning and actually has turned into a meme. And then you
Mm,
have like abstract experiences like Greece that are so beautiful. But one point that was brought up that I thought was really good is, or at least a question is, do you think in some cases having experiences that abstract mean people don't understand that it's about grief, and if they lose the message, is that still impactful? And I was like, I honestly, you get what you want out of this game. I'm
yeah,
cool with that.
exactly. Hmm.
But I think there is a question of like, hey, but if we're making a game about grief, how explicit do we want to be or do we need to be as creators? Which I thought was a really good question.
That's a really good point. And it's interesting because you talked about the idea of like almost like trigger warnings or content warnings. And
Hmm.
um, Greece is abstract to the point that I don't know that you would have to have any content warnings
Right.
about the fact that you are playing through the stages of grief. Um, but it kind of depends, I guess, on what the studio or the developer's goal is, right? Like if your
Right.
goal is to make a game about grief explicitly, and it's like there's a message I want to communicate here,
Hmm.
that's one objective. That has never felt like the objective of Greece to me. And this is just my opinion. This is not like
Right.
I haven't done any reading on this or anything, but like
Right.
the vibe that I've gotten from Greece is like, we are going to make this beautiful game that has layers of meaning, and if you spend your
Mhm.
time, you can uncover those layers, and the
Mhm.
meaningful layers in this game happen to deal with grief to a degree.
Yeah. And I think I totally agree. I think that game for me, when playing it, does not necessarily need like the content warnings that surround other games that have to do with grief. Have you heard of that Dragon Cancer?
No.
Ooh, okay. Heavy game. Definitely don't play it if you're like in a vulnerable place. But that Dragon Cancer is a narrative game, linear narrative game about parents going through essentially the terminal cancer diagnosis of their child. It is a
Oh.
heavy game. It is so hard. It is so rough. And they absolutely, before you play that game, they have content warnings. They let you know, like, this is what the game is about. So if you
Mm.
go in, you know that you're dealing with like child mortality and parents who are losing their kid and all of this stuff. And that's like one example of like, I think good content warnings.
Yeah.
Um, have you played you've played Edith Finch, right? Have I
Yes.
recommend? Okay.
We've played
I
that.
I absolutely love that game. What was really interesting is one of the panelists mentioned how they they really really hated playing that game
Oh.
because as a person who went through a lot of trauma in their childhood that had to do with familial abuse and generational trauma, they were like there were no content warnings for me, and going into that game was like the biggest sort of like flag and trigger and like brought up a lot of horrible memories and anxiety. And I was like, oh,
Mm.
I didn't even think about that. And so thinking about the ways that games deal with grief and signal grief, it was just, yeah, it was a good conversation. And I really
Sounds like
want
a
to
rich
dive in more.
conversation.
Yeah.
Mm. Very cool. What else have you
Yeah.
been into?
But other than that, binge watching a lot of K dramas. I have started and finished Business Proposal, which you started recently,
Yes, you
right?
got me into it. The first episode, I'm hooked. It's so good.
Ooh. Oh my gosh, if anyone else is listening to Business Proposal or watching it, please let me know. I it's been a long time since I found a K-drama that like really hooked me. I think I
Mm.
watched so many of them at over the pandemic. I was like, I just can't watch anymore. I'm back. I'm back, baby, and ready to watch K-dramas, and it's so good. Um, yeah,
The
very, very much love
dialogue
it.
is so snappy in that show. Like it's humorous. Like it's a funny show, and it's just like I'm trying to imagine like what I don't even know what Gilmore Girls is like the
Yeah.
speed equivalent of the
Yeah.
dialogue there, where it's just like ba 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 ba. That's how I feel when I'm watching this show. Like the back
Mhm.
and forth between characters is so fast and so funny. Like I the snarky little comments. What a great recommendation. Thank you for making it.
Yay, I'm so happy you like it. And I think anyone who's also familiar with K dramas, and even if you're not, they kind of illustrate this meta and this acknowledgement of like the tropes of K dramas, and they play with it throughout the entire series. It's so good. So I appreciate that they're able to sort of laugh at themselves and take these tropes and sometimes really lean into them so you know that it's something that's like super common, and then in some cases they'll subvert them really in very fun ways. So yes, I very much recommend watching it if you're looking for something fun, lighthearted. Definitely just like turn off your brain a little bit and just enjoy like this sort of idealistic fantasy kind of romance here.
So good.
Okay.
What else you got? What else you been into?
And then the last thing before we finish up today, we both saw the trailer for The Boy and the Heron. It's so good. Okay. Tell me just what were some of those like words that ran through your head as you were watching the trailer? I guess quickly, for those who don't know, The Boy and the Heron is the latest Studio Ghibli film by director Miyazaki, who has come out of retirement for the up 10th time. He's never going to retire. It's a lie. But the amazing thing about this movie is that, at least in Japan, they just dropped it. There was like I dropped that pen. If you heard it on the mic, there was no marketing. There was nothing. It was just like they just one day were like, yeah, and thus a movie, which is kind of like you can only do that if you
Wild.
were Studio Ghibli and Hayao
Yeah.
Miyazaki. But yeah, trailer. They finally released the English version so we could watch it. What do you think?
Oh, did you watch the English version of the trailer?
Yes.
I watched the
Yeah.
Japanese version of the trailer.
Oh my gosh, no, they just dropped the English version and the English release date.
So I think I watched the same trailer, but the language was all in Japanese. I think is
Was it
like
in
it was.
Jap? Did I watch it in Japanese and just like imagine English because I was reading subtitles? Hold on, let me see what I actually want.
Yeah, because I think I just watched it like this morning or last night or something like that, and it was like
Yes.
new trailer finally, or the trailer finally dropped. Um, yeah, I the I will. Here's like my very first thought was the opening scene of this trailer looks like one of the last scenes from Grave of the Fireflies, and I was like, oh no, what am I in for on this ride? Is this going to be another like extremely heavy, devastating movie? And it looks like, yeah, it's going to be devastating, but also the most whimsical, fantastical, magical world. It's like, you even like Spirited Away, which is like all in this magical world, you're kind of getting like little tastes of magic throughout. The
Right.
trailer that we saw was like, it was like double stuffed Oreo stuffed with whimsy and
My
magic.
gosh,
Those are my first
so
thoughts. I
good.
don't know. What were your first thoughts?
Okay, so I brought up the trailer because I was like, I swear I was reading English subtitles and just like inserted in my head that was all in English. So that's why it's the definitely speaking Japanese.
Okay.
Um, okay. Um, I also had the same connection to the Grave of the Fireflies, which broke my heart because I was like, oh my gosh, are we really going there again? And we are. But yeah, the what I love about the fantasy in this and in Spirited Away, but this seems to lean more heavily into it, is it's very like grounded, darker fantasy. Like
Hmm.
there's a scene
Hmm.
where there are these like frogs like climbing on this kid's face and they're saying, please join us. And they're not like cute, karopi, whimsical cottagecore frogs. They're like toads, they're very like grim looking. They look real.
It looks
um
gross.
yeah, it doesn't look pleasant. There's this really interesting mix of modern and old and fantasy and reality that I think is going to be so cool. I'm excited. I think the whole time I was just like gripped by the trailer. I didn't want to blink. um it just looks phenomenal and it's coming out December 8th in the US, and I'm just like, I'm ready. I'm going to go see it opening weekend, if not the first day. Um, I'm so
Is that
excited.
the weekend we get back from Japan? It
It is.
is.
It is. And in theory, I'm going to be because I may be going to LA on the 7th. And so I'm not gonna miss opening day though. I may go to LA on the 7th, come back morning of the 8th so I can go see the movie in theaters here at home. I'm so excited. It's gonna be great.
Yes. The moment where he like touches a woman who I think is perhaps his mom, and she like melts
Yeah.
into a puddle. The thing that we have not talked about yet is like the animation in this trailer is better than any like mappa like modern anime like you have seen. Like it is astounding. Like the movement,
Stunning.
motion, like the ripples. I was gobsmacked from the opening scene of that trailer to the
Yeah.
last. Like I was just blown away.
Yeah, I have it up on the other screen right now, and I'm just kind of like scrolling through it. It just looks so good. I can't wait. So definitely wanted to bring it up in today's pastry case in case anyone else is a Ghibli fan, anyone else likes animated movies, fantasy, reality, all that. It's coming together. I'm so excited.
Me
Also, we
too.
have this we didn't even okay, I only know this because I'm again, the trailer's just on loop in front of me. Um Instead of the Kodadama from like Spirited Away, we've got these like white little cute blobs that are floating in the air, so I think we have another cute character that will be able to like put on things.
The fan art is about to be wild.
It's going to be good. All right. Well, I think that is it for today. I think we're all set.
Uh Well, as a way of saying thank you for joining us again, as always, please do take a moment, leave us some reviews. We appreciate any sort of comments and engagement. We love chatting with you all on Discord and on the emails and in the comment section. So let us know what you're thinking about Cosmic Wheel Sisterhood. As a way of saying goodbye, you can also find us on the socials at Geeks and Grounds. For pretty much our handle is basically everywhere now. So we're really stepping out. We hope you join us as we do that. Any other announcements or housekeeping things, Jenny?
Nope. I think that's it. You got it.
Yes. I'm just doing my best. Just doing my best out here.
Doing an amazing job.
Thank you for joining us at Geeks and Grounds. If you find yourself on the Cosmic Wheel, break the wheel.
Yeah, rise up.
Bye.
Bye.